Okay, we left off with the last recording with child example 1 that created a fish, actually inherited a fish class. The trout class was what was inheriting the fish class. Go back and watch if you're jumping into this video without watching the first segment on inheritance. Go back and do that first. Okay, so we had pretty well kicked the tires on everything that normal inheritance could do. The next thing that we want to talk about is not only can we inherit things from another class, but we can override things. So what you're going to see here is we're going to create a shark class. Sharks actually have eyelids, if I remember correctly, and sharks have cartilage instead of bone. And they also have another problem. A shark can't swim backwards. They can sink backwards, but they can't swim backwards. So that means that if we create a shark class and we're inheriting everything from a fish, we've got a problem, haven't we? Because this is wrong. So what you're going to find out is we can override this method in a child class. And this is the fish is the parent class. The trout in this example is the child class. So I'm going to flip back over to Blackboard and show you where that's talked about in the inheritance material. Okay, we're back in Blackboard. Here's the code that we were just looking at in its entirety. You'll notice there's some dots here that says basically we didn't include that code here, but you can see the full example that I created for you right here. Okay, now I'm going to scroll on down to the overriding parent methods. You remember the fish class is the parent class. We're going to create this shark class right here. The shark class still inherits from the fish class. We know that because fish is inside the parentheses. Look at this. We have a different constructor. A different constructor for a shark. Okay? So a shark is getting a different constructor. That's because the shark has eyelids. The shark's skeleton is cartilage. And of course, we're giving it a last name of shark as well. Okay, here, so we're actually overriding two methods, aren't we? We're overriding the constructor. We're also overriding the swim backwards method, because you can see here a shark cannot swim backwards, it can sink backwards. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the Tani editor and we can play with this code in its entirety. Okay, this is the code for the child with override example 2. You'll notice we have our fish class that has not been changed. This is our parent class. Here we have a shark class that we're creating that inherits from everything from the fish. But you'll notice we have a different constructor here. This constructor is going to replace this one. That process of replacing this method is called override. So we're overriding the constructor. We're also overriding the swim backwards. You'll notice they're both named exactly the same as the methods in the parent class. So this is going to replace the swim backwards that we got when we inherited the fish. This is going to replace the constructor that we got when we inherited the fish. Okay, so here is some code that we have to test this out. I'm going to clear the shell and I'm going to run it. And you can see that we're still able to access the first and last name of the shark. And you see we got that Sammy shark. It says the fish is swimming. Okay, that was where we called the swim method. We didn't override the swim method, so it's using the swim method from the parent class. Okay, here we called the swim backwards method of the Sammy object, and you can see that it says the shark cannot swim backwards, but it can sink backwards. Here you can see that our shark named Sammy has eyelids. That's set to true, and you can see that the skeleton of our Sammy shark is cartilage instead of bone. So that's our example, a complete example of overriding. Now, you have to implement these concepts in your exam project or program. I'm going to switch back over to Blackboard, and you can see we'll go talk about the exam project a little bit. Okay, back in Blackboard, let's use the breadcrumbs in Blackboard. These are the breadcrumbs up here at the top. They'll allow us to get around a little bit quicker. So I'm going to click on Module 1. That will back me up. You can see that the Module 1 Exam Part 2 program is due this coming Sunday. Okay. Scrolling down, popping into the Module 1 exam. This is the exam program. You'll notice that you need to submit 2 files. You're going to need to submit your date format, which is the Project 1, and you're going to need to submit Exam 1. Notice how this should have, for instance, my Exam 1 would be exam1_clifton.py. My date format would be dateformat_clifton.py. Those are the files that would be attached. Okay, let's look at the exam for a moment. You'll notice that your exam needs to import everything from your Project 1. That means that your Project 1 file, date format _your last name .py, must be in the same folder as your exam. Make sure when you're trying to test this that you save your exam in exactly the same folder as your Project 1. Otherwise, things are not going to work right. Okay, so you've got one line of your exam done. All right, you'll notice down here it says right here that you need to inherit the date class. So we just talked about inheritance. Okay. It also says that your your new class that you're creating for the exam called exam date. Exam date is going to inherit from the date class. So date's going to be inside the parentheses in case you didn't figure that out already. Okay, it needs to implement a new private property in your exam date class that's called _datesep. Okay, that's going to be done in the constructor. This is talking about the super method, and we'll go talk about that next. Okay, but you can see that you're going to have some overriding going on in the exam project or program as well. So it's not a real long program because it inherits most everything from the project 1 that you created. But I hope it's apparent to you that because we're importing project 1 and because we're inheriting from project 1, if your project 1 doesn't work, your exam is not going to work. Okay, let's go back to use the breadcrumbs again, and let's go back to talk about the super method. So back in the inheritance with Python classes, I'm going to scroll down until we find the super method. Now this is a function, the super function is used when we're doing inheritance. And what if we needed to run the constructor from the parent class as well as the constructor from the child class? Well, Houston, we have a problem if we want to do that because we've overridden what's in the parent. Well, the super function allows us to still get to the constructor in the parent class. That's a really neat thing that it allows us to do. Now, here's an example of using the super method or function. One thing that I have to point out to you is when you use super, you do not pass self to it. I hope that makes some sense after we talk about it, but we're calling the constructor for the parent class. We can't pass self to it, otherwise things just wouldn't work right. So we're passing first name to it because that is actually required in our fish class. If we go look, what's the only required property? The only property or argument that doesn't have a default value already set is first name. We have to supply first name if we're going to create a fish. So that's why first name is right there. But you'll notice that this is the only time that we don't pass self to something is when we're using super. Okay, so the things to remember about super: it lets us call the constructor. It lets us call the constructor in the parent class. And you'll notice where we put this call to super. Where did we put it? We put it inside the constructor of the child class. So make sure you understand about super. Feel free to read this material about the super function. There are a lot of questions on it in your exam as well. So you got to understand what super does, and we use this super function in every single graphics program that we create. And we start creating graphics programs in Module 2. So you will see super being used over and over and over, and you'll be seeing self used with every other method over and over and over. Okay? So study up on super. Good luck with the exam, and make sure that you do project 1 as soon as possible. Good luck.